So if you've been following along and you've done the previous video tutorials, you should now have a screen that looks a little bit like this. Yours might be slightly different depending on how you've configured the sizes and the fonts and things. The first thing we want to do is have this login button actually open a separate login window. Now, normally it would check a database to see whether the person actually had an account and logged them in, but we're not going to do anything with the database because it's beyond the scope. But we do want this button to at least work so that when we press it, it opens the ability to type a customer ID, maybe name, username, something like that into a window. And we can have another button on there, again, which won't do anything, but at least we can demonstrate the prototype will have a login screen, which will have a button which will then check against the database. So what we want to do is we want to go back up to the top of the window. So this is where we imported our libraries. This is where we created the window, and this is where we configured the columns. I want now to define another window that will pop up when we press that button. So I need to do two things. I need to define a function that will run a whole bunch of lines of codes all at once, but I don't want it to run those lines of code until we press the login button. So the first thing we need to do is define a function, and you can call a function whatever you like. So I'm going to call this login win because it's going to be my login window. Now you'll notice the IDE is helping us. It knows it's a function, it's made it purple. It knows that there's a name for this function, it's made it blue. You have to open and close a bracket, and then you have to put the colon. And again, the IDE here is being helpful because when I press return, it's automatically putting in the spaces that Python needs. Python is very particular about the way these things are structured in terms of spacing. By default, it should be giving you 4 spaces from the left-hand margin. If it doesn't, you're going to have to just type 4 spaces with the space bar. If you use 3 or 5, it may still run, but it will give you a warning that there's too many spaces. In some cases, it just won't run at all because it won't understand the structure of the function. Right, so the first thing we need to do is give our login window a name. So we want to define a variable that basically has this new window inside it. So here we defined window as TK. Here we need to define window not as TK, but as top level. So it knows it's another window that it's going to open on top of the existing window. So again, it doesn't really matter what we call this as long as it makes sense to us, okay? So I can't use login window because that's what I've defined the function, but I could call it login screen, for example, okay? And again, this is a variable, so it has to equal something. And in our case, it's going to be TK because it's a part of the Kinter library. But we use something called top level. And then we want to make sure that that is on our existing window. Everything we do from now will be to add information to this new window. So we won't use window, we'll use login screen. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is give the window a title and give it some geometry, same as we did over here. So login underscore screen. So it follows the same pattern as we did over here. Dot title. All right, and then what we want to do here is basically give it a name. So in between a couple of quotes. So this is going to be login window, login screen, login windows, or just login. You can call it whatever you want. And then exactly the same as we did over here, we need the geometry now of this login screen window. Okay, so dot geometry. Now we don't want it as big as the window we have. We don't want it 700 by 650. That's going to be too big because it's only supposed to be a little pop-up window. So let's try 350 by 250. If it's too big, if we don't like it, we can just come back and then change these numbers later. So that should create a window, give it a title and give it some space, but there isn't anything in this new login window. We need at least somewhere for them to type something in a box and then press a button. So we're going to need a label and then an entry box and a button as a minimum. You might want on yours to have two labels, maybe one for name, one for ID, one for name, one for password. I'm just going to go with one, but again, you might want to extend yours out and possibly do two. So I want a label that just tells someone, to type the name or type their ID or something like that. And again, it doesn't matter. I can just call it cust ID or something like that. Okay. And this is going to be tk.label, same as every other label we've done. But this time I don't want to put it on the window because it'll end up on the window I've already got. I want it on my new window. So I want it to go on the login screen. Okay. Right, now it needs some text. So what do we want to say? So in between a couple of quotes, we want it to say something like, enter username or enter password or customer ID or, whatever makes sense. I'm just going to do customer ID, but you might want to do name and password or name and ID or something like that. Right, and then the only other thing I need to think about here is, do I want the font on this to be the same as the other font sizes I've been using on all my other labels? Makes sense to have it look the same, so I'm just going to go, and grab a bit of code from one of my other labels and so that it's font size 14 and it's Arial. And then same as before, because it's a window and it has its own grid, we have to pop this customer ID onto the grid. So I can just pop it on, I don't know, row 0 and column 0. So it's just in the top left. But just to make it not quite so squished up to the side and to the top, just going to add a bit of X and Y padding so it doesn't look, quite so stuck to the edges of the box. Okay, now we need an entry. We told them we want the customer ID. Now we need an entry box so that they can actually type their ID in. So this is going to be the same as we've done all our entries previously. So we'll call it ENT. And again, this could just be cust ID again. And this is going to be an entry. So it will be tk dot entry. Okay, and then we want to put this on our login screen window. So underscore login screen. Okay, and then we need, as we've done with all other entries, just to decide how wide we would like it to be. Now we're asking them to put in potentially quite a long customer ID or a whole name or quite a long complex password. So we might want to go for 20, 25, give them space to be able to actually write something in that window. Okay, so that's our entry, and then we might want to put that obviously now on to the grid with a little bit of padding, maybe the same as we did before, so it's not quite so stuck to the top. Okay, ENT. We could have defined the font like we did as well earlier on, but we'll see what it looks like when it comes up. If it looks a bit small when we type in the box, we can just increase the font size to 14. So it's going to go on a grid. Okay, I'm going to go with the same row. I'm just going to push it along to the next column so it's next to it. Okay, and then probably go with the same pad X and pad Y as we did so that it looks like it's, roughly in the same place. But again, if I don't like the look of it, it's a really quick and easy change up. So what we should have now then is a label that says customer ID, an entry box that they can type the customer ID into. The last thing we need is a button, so it looks like when we press it, it actually goes off and validates the logon. So again, we can use, now what we've got to be careful of here is if we scroll down, we already called this BTN login. So we don't want to use BTN login again because it's just going to confuse the issue. So we could call it BTN login 2, or we could call it something completely different, BTN login win. Doesn't really matter as long as it's different than any other variable we've used already. Okay. So same as before, it's going to be a TTK button. So that they're all that same kind of flat look and feel. This is going to go on the login screen window like the others. We need to define the width of this, and we did the others 12. So we'll do this one also as 12. And I think that's pretty much it for our button. We just now need to stick it on the grid. So BTN underscore login underscore win dot grid. Now we can put this to the right of the other things that we've got on here, so they're all on the same line, or we can pop it underneath. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to drop mine down to row 1 so it appears underneath. I could just put it in column 1 as well. If I don't like it, I can change it in a minute. And I'm going to do sticky equals west. Okay, now if we run that, we're not actually going to see this new window. It's not really going to do much because we've got some code here to create a window and give it a name and everything, but nobody really knows how to get this window open because we haven't actually done anything yet with this button. So we haven't actually triggered all of this code. So what we do need to do is we need to go to our button that we created earlier on. So hopefully you've got a nice comment here so you can find your button quite easily. And we need to tell this button to run a command. And the command is all of this, which we called login underscore win. You don't need the brackets, just that. So when we press this button login, it runs this command, it jumps up here, runs all of this. So let's see if it works. Okay, so this time when we press the login button, it opens this extra little window that I can use to log in. It's not quite long enough, and I didn't put any text on the actual button. So let's just fix those things. Okay, so I've got a button here, but I forgot to put some text on it. All right, so I'm just going to call it submit, or you can have OK. You see that often on buttons as well, and it's not really long enough. So let's just increase this. Okay. Okay, I've made it longer, not wider, but you can see the submit's coming up now. So this is the button I need to. Okay, height times width. Okay, login. Okay, that looks okay. It's a little bit long, but you can fix that. But it's there now. You can type something in that box. Like I said, it doesn't do anything, but the pop-up window should now at least be working.